Usually, conversations about pleasure, consent, and choice are silenced by our society and are usually treated as taboo. But at the same time, it's extremely important for our health, dignity, and freedom. So, welcome to the very first podcast of this series of podcasts brought to you by UNFPA Sri Lanka in collaboration with Newsfirst. And I'm extremely delighted to be joined by two individuals who render a big service when it comes to breaking down stigma, breaking down social barriers that we have set up and that hinder us from moving forward as a nation. Allow me to introduce them to you. We have Hans Billimoria, director of the Grassrooted Trust, whose bold advocacy centers around communities that are often marginalized when it comes to these topics. And we also have Dr. Rashmi Balasuriya, a director of the ARA Initiative, who works to expand access to sexual as well as reproductive health information and knowledge. Now, during this conversation, together, we will be working towards breaking down certain myths that are surrounding these topics, trying to challenge the stigma that surrounds conversations revolving around the topics that I mentioned earlier. So whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, get comfortable, and I invite you to stay tuned with us right throughout this conversation, as it's going to be very informative, very interesting, and of course, if you can relate to this, it's definitely something that you must stay tuned with. So let's begin. Hans and Dr. Rashmira, allow me to start off with something a little bit personal. When you hear the words pleasure, consent, choice, what does it mean to you personally as someone who maybe grew up and was born and raised in Sri Lanka? What does it mean to you personally?
I think for me personally, those words were not in my vocabulary growing up, and that is quite honest truth. Growing up in school, I'm sure as many children still today, I did not receive comprehensive sexual education. And actually, it was only once I was older, went into medical school, I actually learned about consent and pleasure and choice, to be honest. So I think growing up, that was not in my vocabulary at all. I wasn't even thinking about it. And even the word pleasure, even from a medical aspect, we still don't talk a lot about it. So pleasure only came way after when I was, doing my advocacy work and then actually understanding about pleasure and about sexual pleasure. So yeah, that was my very limited understanding of those words.
So introduction was basically no introduction.
Basically nothing, yes.
I think that's quite common even for me. I mean, pleasure and consent, these were not conversations we'd have at home. Forget about school. These were just not conversations. I came from a time where we would watch and fast forward videotapes whenever that scene came where our parents decided that need to be fast forwarded because it was inappropriate for us to watch, and it may have been kissing or some heavy petting or whatever. Noisers for sure, even the noisers used to embarrass my parents, and there would be a fast forward.
There's a gecko on the wall, look at the gecko. Don't look at the TV screen.
Yeah. So the conversations around pleasure have not happened, and I would argue don't really happen.
Still.
Still.
That's true. But why do you think so? Why do you think it's so difficult for us to open up about pleasure, topics like sex, even around the people that we trust? Like you said, even our families, starting from home itself, it's something difficult to, expose ourselves to. Why do you think that's the case?
I think there's such a culturally built wall when it comes to anything to do with reproduction or sexual health and that kind of sexual pleasure, that it makes it an uncomfortable conversation even with peers, even with friends, right? To break open and talk about things like, for instance, masturbation. For females also, female masturbation is not spoken about at all, literally, amongst circles sometimes. When it comes to people we trust, like our parents, for instance, I think there is that hierarchy, that kind of relationship that not everybody has, where they have that open conversations with their parents. I think even for me, with my parents, I never had open conversations with them until I got into this field, and then I was talking about it on TV, I was talking about it with, workshops, so then they had to have this conversation with me. So even understanding homosexuality, for instance, that was a conversation that came because of my advocacy work for my parents. Others, they would have never spoken about that. And they also had their own beliefs. So sexual pleasure, for instance, consent, with all these issues that we've had about, the condom being removed when you're having sex, stealthing, oh, but the girl went home with him, she asked for it. All these conversations came up only after we had to sit and explain to them there is consent. There is something that she can say no, she can take it back when she wants to. So those conversations are very difficult to have when you have a very strict and very barrier built kind of a family or schooling or upbringing and things like that. So I think culturally it has a lot to do with why we don't talk about this.
I'd concur. So we have to encourage families to have open lines of communication with their children in terms of sex and reproduction and relationships. These are things that we have to talk about. Now, to talk about it, we can have an age-appropriate approach to it, right? You don't have to talk about condoms to your toddler or so on and so forth, but you can have conversations around bodily autonomy and about who is allowed to touch and who is not allowed to touch and what it means to feel uncomfortable. And these are established approaches that have been really, really helpful to parents in terms of when they have that conversation, right? So what we need to do is give the parents the skill set to begin those conversations with their children and then slowly, hopefully have that cascading effect from there.
So now, something that's also been said, now that you spoke about culture, something that I remembered was, these things are Westernized concepts, according to many Sri Lankans. But can we break that down first? What do they mean by Westernized concepts and where are they going wrong?
I think Hans and I were just having a conversation about
but
this.
what is the Western concept? Let's be specific.
Exactly.
What is a Western? Give me an example of a Western concept.
For example, let's say, this is something I've heard a lot,
Okay.
sexuality. When it comes to sexuality, they say it's a Westernized concept. Don't bring it into our culture. But where are they going
So when
wrong
you
with
mean
this?
sexuality, do you mean a person's sexual orientation? Is that what
That
we
too,
mean?
Okay.
That too, yes.
Okay. So if we mean a person's sexual orientation, we are saying then that, let's say, homosexuality or bisexuality is a Western concept, right? And that in our part of the world, heterosexuality is the norm, right? So it's that sort of heteronormative discussion, okay? Western concept. Now, if you unpack this very simply, how can it be a Western concept? Because we are in the region of India. If you go to Khajuraho, 8th century AD or CE, Common Era, you will have very, Google, you will have very detailed stone carvings on homosexual and bisexual sexual encounters, right? Including group sex. If you take a look at the Kama Sutra, which goes back even further, then you will see that the Kama Sutra was not written for the heteronormative heterosexual. Kama Sutra talks about sexual pleasure for everyone. Man with man, woman with woman, man with many men, woman with many women, etc. Right? So sexual pleasure as a conversation also shows us through now these publications and these stone freezers that in our part of the world, we've been here, we've had these conversations. These are our people. So then we have to see, where did that change? So then we generally start pointing fingers at Victorian England, and we generally start pointing fingers at the way that our laws were formed based on a Judeo-Christian story. So those things start to happen, and then you see how even a very feminine gender expression, if you like. Now, if you read, who was the chap who was here and ran away? Knox, no? Robert Knox. Now read Robert Knox and his depiction of the Ceylonese man. You would see a gender expression that is quite feminine, like, so the long hair, we know. We've seen the pictures, the long hair, the tortoiseshell comb, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even how he would look. I mean, look at our photographers like Lionel Wendt. He had an eye for the Sri Lankan man and how lithe he can be and how sensual he can be. So this was not about sexuality. This is also about pleasure. Those conversations, we just don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like Khan said, it was a very the Western ideology that was what came with colonization. And that Catholic Christian kind of norm that they brought where you have to be heterosexual. So before that, there was a lot of different kind of sexualities, sexual orientations, and sexual pleasures going on.
Now, on that note, let's move on to myths, which is a huge reason for us to be set back as a society in whole. Can we talk about the myths that are surrounding the female body, the use of contraception, pleasure, consent, all the myths? Can we talk about it and try to break them down one by one? Whatever we can. I know there's a lot.
So many.
but yes, exactly. Let's try. Let's try.
I think the commonest myth that I hear, so when we do workshops, for instance, is about using condoms and pleasure. That's very, very common, where men are very against using condoms, saying it'll reduce their pleasure.
Raincoat එකක් දාලා නාන්න බෑ.
Yes. I also got the shower cap එකක් දාලා yes, I got the same thing. So where what is the point of having sex if you're wearing something? It's like having a shower with a shower cap.
තාම කොලේ තියෙන ටොපියක් කනවා වගේ. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I also get the thing where, that's too small for me, it won't fit me, you know? Yeah, that's so common.
Yeah.
And
You get that a lot?
yes.
So when I get that, I say, blow up a condom.
Exactly. And it blows up like a balloon. I was like, this is not fitting in, bro. That's another problem that you're having.
Now I'm saying, how many can we fit in?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Just take a standard everyday condom and blow it up.
Yeah.
And then ask yourself, on an average Sri Lankan size, Google, you'll find out how many penises can you fit in. So the conversation about it being too small, too tight,
It's ridiculous. And also, again, there are so many different kinds of condoms available. You have thin feel, you have ribbed, you have this flavor, that flavor. So your pleasure, there are different ways of getting it. If the standard condom doesn't work for you, fine. There's a thin one. There is a ribbed one. There are different ways of enhance the female pleasure also if you want.
But Doc, won't you agree pleasure is here, so?
100%. The brain is the biggest pleasure organ.
Right. So
Yeah.
pleasure is here. Right.
It's
So
also
now,
a myth, I feel like.
no, yeah. So pleasure is here, right? So
Yeah.
this is where it tells you that it is pleasurable. So it's nothing to do with what is down there, right? So, for example, if you take some condoms, let's say dotted or ribbed, or let's say the ones with benzocaine to sort of make you last longer. Now that conversation around condoms, if we take a look at pleasure, then we have to start getting into the space of female pleasure. Because those are there essentially to stimulate the vaginal walls or for the man to last longer so that we can help the woman towards an orgasm, right? The very conversation around orgasms or ejaculations, for example, we need to improve that conversation. So even if you take a look at our current health book, you will have a section on nightly emissions.
Yeah.
Right? Not so much on masturbation, though it's there in the teacher guide that these conversations need to happen. Good luck with that. But you'll have a conversation on nightly emissions, not really on pleasure. Or what can the girl do? So then suddenly there's this understanding among it's only the boys who masturbate.
Yeah.
It's only the boys who ejaculate. So there is no conversation around the woman. Now I brought today, very quickly, okay, I bought today a model clitoris. Okay, we won't show it. But I brought today to show you that this modern clitoris is larger than we think. So I'm going to read here. Your clitoris is 9 centimeters by 9 centimeters. The nerves that connect the clitoris are large. Orgasms are explosive, enjoyable pulsations that are felt deep in the pelvis, vagina, anus, and erogenous zones. It is a whole body experience. Orgasms originate from the clitoris as a reflex. They are relaxing and release the happy hormone oxytocin. Right? A very sort of fact-based approach to this. Now, we in the school curriculum, correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, we focus on sex as a potential result of intended or unintended pregnancy. Sex as something where we need to prevent sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. Or sex where the violation of consent will lead to sexual and gender-based violence. So sex then inherently has these negative connotations around it. And that is why the conversation before we even get to sex has to go, and before we even get to pleasure, has to go to consent. Would you say, Doctor?
100%.
Yeah.
And even now, like in my clinics, I see so many women with what we call vaginismus, where the muscles outside the vaginal wall are contracting subconsciously. So it prevents you from having sex because they have this inbuilt fear of sex. From the time we're small, we're taught boys are bad, don't look at the boy, don't touch the boy. But then when you're married, you're expected to consummate the marriage like that without any problems. And subconsciously, your mind has been told, sex is bad. So subconscious, when you're actually going to have sex, you are not there. You don't want to have sex. And then
Your body's so conditioned
yeah,
to
and your body
reject
closes
it.
up. Yeah, your body
Yeah.
closes up essentially, and it causes huge issues with relationships. So I mean, that's exactly what Hans is saying. So we've been taught that sex is bad so much that it affects our body as well.
So consent, then we need to start age appropriately again in terms of the consent of the child. Right? What is consent? And for example, the example I always give is we sometimes force our children to kiss or greet adults that they don't want to kiss or greet.
Every child's experience, actually.
Right? So when you are forcing the child to do that, then there is a relationship of power between you and the child. And the child learns that my no is actually not no when there is this relationship of power that exists. So if we want to teach consent to the child, help that child understand that he or she or they have bodily autonomy and they have a right to say no if they don't want to kiss the creepy uncle or the creepy auntie in their mind.
No, 100%. And I think exactly that consent starts so young and teaching you about your body and what is okay with you. If you're not okay with it, you just say no, and that no is no. But again, we force young kids to give their uncle a hug, give their auntie a kiss, say bye, say this, say that. So, yeah.
Does consent go beyond a yes or no? Is it just a black and white concept, or can we dive deeper
Over to
into
you,
that?
over to you,
Because normally that's the impression, right?
Yes.
Consent is yes or no and nothing else in between.
Yeah.
Top question.
So the Planned Parenthood actually came up with this acronym called FRIES. That was the initial acronym. So about consent. So F is freely given, R is it's reversible, I is informed, E is enthusiastic, and S is specific. That is what consent is. But now they've changed it because you can't always have freely given consent. There will always be a power dynamic sometimes between relationships. So in that instance, they changed the F to a C and made it considered. Right? And then instead of saying enthusiastic, because sometimes when you're first having sex, it's very daunting. It's scary to have sex for that first time. And maybe even afterwards, if it's, you had a bit of pain on your first time, you might not be so enthusiastic about having sex a second time, right? So they took out that and they've changed the word to P, participatory. So now it goes as crisp. Yeah. So I mean
No harm, crisp.
yeah,
Be
so
crisp. Be
exactly.
crisp.
So it gives you kind of a better understanding of what consent is, because people, to be honest, when you think about marriage, for instance, in Sri Lanka, marital rape is still not recognized, right? So there is no consent in that instance. And what are we really teaching our children if marital rape is not recognized?
Yeah, it's the patriarchal construct, right?
Exactly,
So consent has no room in this patriarchal construct where young perpetrators of violence say on a bus, turn around to me and say they enjoyed it. How do you know that they enjoyed it? What information do you have that they enjoyed it? Nothing, right? But they enjoyed it because that is what they have been told. So there is a reason that sexual violence on a bus of women over the age of 14, according to the UNFPA report in 2016, Oxfam reports later, over 90% of women over the age of 14 have experienced something on public transport because there is a fundamental lack of understanding on consent.
Yeah.
That's so alarming.
Right? Yes, but so that's the point. So we've had this data for a while.
It's been many years.
Yeah, right. So we've had this data
Yeah.
for a while. So then it comes to this perplexing question of why governments, although the current one is making all the right noises, why governments haven't been able to look at teaching social emotional learning models which give a primacy to content, self-respect, respect for the other, focusing on how we build self-esteem, how we bring the parents into it. So there are models, including Sri Lankan models, that exist on approaches that have been very beneficial to school communities. So it's a very perplexing question thus far that schools have not been doing this and helping children understand that getting on that bus and doing that thing is not cool.
100%. And like Hans is saying, there's a way to teach consent that is age appropriate for children to understand, right? So from the small age, we're teaching them yes and no, but you're saying good, not good touch, bad touch necessarily, but if you're not comfortable, just say no, and no is no. And then as they get older, you teach them more about consent should be freely given, not freely given, but participatory. Consent should be informed. You can take it back. People don't realize that you can't take consent back. It's not reversible. They think once she said yes to going home with him, she should go through with the deed. That's it. Right? So even things like stealthing then comes into question. So he said he'll wear a condom, but he took it off. But you agreed to have sex with him, right? So you weren't specific saying, oh, you have to wear the condom throughout the act of
Like
sex?
an agreement.
Exactly. Yeah.
You put your sign on it already.
Consent has to be based on trust. No?
Yeah.
Now, trust is something that we don't know, again, a soft skill. Trust is something we don't talk enough about. Because trust is based on experience. Whom do we trust the most? It's because we experience that. Now, working in the space of nudes, what are the partners hit over the head with? Trust. Oh, you're not sending me a nude because you don't trust me.
Yeah.
Right? You're not sending me a nude because you don't love me. Right? That's what so they take these relationship ideals and they hit you over the head and say, you don't love me, you don't trust me, I might as well end this relationship, there's no point to this.
Manipulation.
Of course it's manipulation, right? So, but that is predominantly what happens in trying to force somebody, I'm going to say it again, force somebody to send you a nude or make a mutual masturbation video when you're trying to force someone.
Yeah.
Right? So again, those conversations, we don't have to wait till they're given phones with cameras and they are in that adult space experimenting with their sexuality. Early on, we can have those conversations about who it means. When you say, this is the person I trust, what does it make you feel like? You do things, simple things like trust circles, you put me in the middle. And then you get kids to write, okay, who comes in these circles and the outer circle, and then who is outside all the circles. And sometimes then teachers have an opportunity to identify a potential situation here, because on the outside of all that circles may be someone who should be inside that circle. And then what's going on there and what needs to be investigated there. So these are all existing interventions, education interventions, scientifically designed, evidence-based, that you already have. So hopefully this current government is moving in that direction.
Yeah, because like Hans is saying, not just the children, but the teachers also have to be capacitated in that instance. To identify this, they have to have that knowledge, have that skill. Yeah.
Now, usually in school curriculum, there is a unit for science, right? Based on reproductive systems or sexual education.
Health and physical education.
Yeah.
And that, and also in science, there's a chapter on the reproductive system and all.
Yeah.
Right?
And STIs also, when
Yes.
we get to later.
Yes.
Yeah.
So even though the chapter is there in the syllabus, there are many teachers who tell the students, I'm sure you already know this, and they avoid the chapter entirely.
Yeah.
So can we talk about that? How this is a reason for, the issues that we are facing with regards to this?
So very quickly, it boggles my mind that those two science lessons and the health and physical education lessons around reproduction, that this is the only subject in Sri Lankan schools where the teacher gets to decide whether to teach or not. Now, if you had a maths lesson or a වෙන syllabus එකක් ඉවර කරේ නැත්නම් people go nuts.
Yeah.
Right? But here, parents seem to be okay if the teachers say, go home and read this, or this won't come for the exam, or for whatever other plethora of excuses they have to delay that or not do it. Right? So again, that's why we need to bring parents on board within the school ecosystem to help them understand that even these existing lessons, there is real value. Now, if you take a look, you might have taken a look, Doc, HIV is on the rise between 15 to 19-year-olds. Now, criminal, that between the ages of 15 and 19,
The incidence is
that HIV incidences are increasing in an age of antiretroviral therapy and all the rest of it, PrEP and PEP and everything, that we have this increase. So it's criminal, right? So who bears the responsibility for this increase? Why are we not even doing the existing lessons in the classroom? So then we have to go to NIE. Why are you not giving the skills, the National Institute of Education, why are you not giving the skills, the requisite skills to that teacher of that subject to teach that Lajjak Bayak Natua?
In the physical education book, because they have a chapter on netball, a chapter on some other sport, and then they're like a small chapter.
No, so that's what happened when they clubbed it, right? Galen Bindunueva wondering how am I going into the classroom and going to talk about menstruation and menstrual cycles because I have not been given the skill set to do so. So then I will go to that classroom and tell my students from Galen Bindunueva, please go out into the garden and pass the ball around. Right? Or go into the garden, rather play field and pass the ball around because I don't have the skills to do that. And that is the story we hear repeatedly all over. So if we are doing this and if we want to do it, we have the models, we have the evidence, Sinhala and Tamil approaches. This is not a foreign approach. This is a homegrown approach. UNFPA, the Ministry of Education, the National Child Protection Authority, all these organizations have worked on how many pilots? You tell me, Doc. How many pilots? How much evidence we have that it works? So then again, that disconnect between the gatekeepers at NIE and the rest. Right? So how do we get through that? Hopefully, the current government, led by the Prime Minister, who is in charge of the Ministry of Education, has a way through. So we watch with bated breath.
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't hold it.
But I think one of the highlights, one of the key points that you make then, Hans, is that we need to capacitate teachers.
Absolutely.
That is like job number one is, yes, we have to need a curriculum that's, comprehensive, but we have to capacitate the teachers because the teachers are so exam driven that they say, oh, we have to finish maths and English and science. We can't do this. And that is a really easy excuse to use. But we have to capacitate teachers to understand the importance of this for the children when they grow up, when they get into the real world. It's not even, don't need to grow up.
What's our legal age?
16, yeah. 16.
Legal age is 16 to have sex. What's the age to get married?
18.
So then isn't it our responsibility?
Yes.
If we are saying legally these kids can get married at 18 and can have sex at 16, they try to make it 14.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if we are having these conversations and this is the legality or this is what the situation is in, isn't it then incumbent upon us as a community and the responsibility of whoever the powers that be to get this done?
But that's why we shouldn't be surprised that the incidence of HIV has increased amongst the 15 to 24-year-old age group, especially the 15 to 19-year-olds, because we're not educating them. We're not giving them that information that you can use a condom to prevent.
But condom is not in the textbook.
No, the word is not there.
No, so you have a basic ABC methodology is kind of laid out. You have abstinence, don't have sex before marriage. You have the B, which is be faithful. But then the C, you have this sort of opaque statement that says assess your risks and take precautions. So that's the statement. So now assess your risks and take precautions means what? So then it's up to the interpretation, it's up to the teacher to say, okay, maybe I can talk about condoms around this. But they don't want you to talk about condoms around this because their rationale is that if you speak about condoms, our children will go and experiment. It's like our children are waiting to read about a condom in a textbook to learn about what a condom is and to experiment. There are ads on radio.
Yeah.
Right? So ridiculous.
They won't wait anyway.
No. Right? So all the more reason then. Look at our unintended pregnancy numbers. Just take a look at that and see where we are. Again, we have the evidence and we don't seem to be doing anything about it, or at least that's what has happened so far. So we'll wait and see.
So how has this shame that's built around all these topics led to individuals viewing themselves, not viewing others necessarily, but viewing themselves, which is really important in becoming a good citizen in the first place? How has it changed that?
So like I said, there's so much sexual dysfunction and problems that I see in my clinic. So for instance, vaginismus, for instance, because we have this shame about having sex and we're told that sex is bad from a young age, that it translates into now having a physical problem. So that is one way. Then even things like premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, all of these things have a huge psychological component. And it results from having this shame and secrecy about it. And a lot of people don't seek medical help even when they have these issues. They would rather just suffer in silence, have issues in their relationships, but not seek help because they're scared to have a conversation about this. So I see it in that way. But even in society today, like Hans and I were having a chat earlier about, for instance, things like female genital mutilation, right? Where you're essentially removing pleasure from the woman. And that is rampant these days, even though people don't talk about it. There was a study done recently by Women's Action Network where it showed out of the sample of about 900 odd women, half of them have had an experience of female genital mutilation either to themselves or they know somebody else who has undergone it. And further so, half of them or 1/3 of them said they believe that it should be done to their children, to their daughters. So it affects them that way. And I've had women who come and said, I don't have an orgasm. I don't get any kind of pleasure from having sex. And they don't know whether they have undergone female genital mutilation because they have not been explicitly told about that.
Yeah, so this is again, so the woman is the object, right? So the pleasure of the woman is not a concern. It is not a concern. So even with masculine pleasure, ejaculation is that ultimate, right? And the path to ejaculation in terms of, even for men, is your erogenous zone only your penis and associated area? You know what I mean? Even for men, what is an erogenous zone? Those conversations, where does it feel nice when it is touched and kissed, etc.? Those are conversations that you can have, bringing it back to pleasure. Because otherwise, sex is, again, I'm saying, viewed as this painful thing. And that when it is viewed as a painful thing, then female genital mutilation kind of fits.
Yeah.
Kind of is part of the norm, right? So now we know of a story where I shared again earlier in terms of FGM, and we know of many stories. This is one, where the female genital mutilation took place at the age of 18, where the tip of the clitoris was removed with a pair of scissors. Now, you saw what I meant by clitoris and how big it is and how far it extends. Now, the fact that this was done by a group of people who thought it was all right tells you that scientific, evidence-based approaches in school curriculums only will have that much effect also. Because what is the system of belief, if you like, where this is permissible? So again, when we're talking about these issues, we really have to talk about how do we engage with people on unpacking the myths and showing them that this is not okay and this is not the way forward, and that there is a way with less pain. There is a way with less pain. Sex does not have to be about pain.
How does someone begin to set that boundary? How can we teach people how to communicate with regards to these topics?
So again, ecosystem. Again, where is the ecosystem? Where do we teach? Where are the places of learning? We have them.
Just not effective enough.
It's not being done.
Doesn't happen at all.
Yeah.
It's not being done. So the models are there. It needs to be done. So again, I'm going to say, the Prime Minister, we've been following everything she's been saying in the media, and she has made all the right noises in terms of what is being done or what is going to be done. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of that, how that's going to be implemented, what that actually means in real time, how long that is going to take, we'll be watching and seeing how that goes and hoping for the best. But unless we do it there, then, Doc, you're going to keep having...
Yeah. So like
Yeah.
Hans said, I think communication has to be taught earlier, communication about this particularly. Because if you're building a barrier and you're perpetuating these stigmas and these beliefs and these taboos around sex, and that sex equals pain and sex equals bad, then you're going to not have any conversation when they get older. So it has to start, like Hans said, in a teaching setting at schools, for instance. Yeah.
So, also surrounding the topic of sex and pleasure, there are certain communities that are automatically left out of this concept, perhaps physical disabilities or anything else surrounding that. Can we talk about their experience, what we need to understand?
I think Hans has great stories.
Definitely. Hans, let's hear it.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, kids who are deaf or young people who are deaf, young people who are blind, why are they asexual? Young people who we perceive to have intellectual disabilities, why are we asexualizing them? I mean, now, today, in places, certain places around the world, the Down syndrome community, for example, you see couples emerging,
Yeah.
you see people having sexual lives and reproductive lives, and there's a lot of destigmatizing that needed to take place in order for that to happen. So again, see, how do we value ourselves and each other? So again, whatever question you ask me, I'm going to come back. I'm coming back there. We need to teach our kids how to value themselves, okay? Because a lot of times, if you ask me, what is the most common denominator between victim and perpetrator, I would say low self-esteem. That for me has become a common denominator.
Yeah.
Like the low self-esteem on some level, with regard to some specific trait even, there is low self-esteem that allows for both the perpetration and being a victim of violence. So then that space, valuing self, valuing the other regardless of who the other is, right? So if we teach our kids to value the other regardless of who the other is, then the deaf kid, the kid in the wheelchair, these kids are no less equal in terms of the potential to live and enjoy life, right? So what is that education system? How do we build that?
And again, like Hans, you were saying how you had done some kind of comprehensive sex ed for persons with mental capacity.
Yes. So we were called in by the school to design a program for them. And then obviously we had to bring in a psychologist who could tell us, okay, and we tested this intervention. We kept testing it until we got it right in terms of being able to communicate. Now, so again, I'm saying these models exist. We didn't reinvent the wheel. These models exist. For example, IPPF, these models exist. For example, UNFPA has got a set of national guidelines now in place. And if we follow those national guidelines, all this is included there, right? In terms of people who are differently abled, if you like. So if those models exist, what we need to do is make sure that they're applied scientifically. Now with this school, like I said to you, I'm not too sure what the continued implementation of it is.
Sustainability is always a question.
Is always a question.
Yeah.
So especially when it becomes a thing that one school is trying to do. So that's why imagine a centralized education system like we have, taking on board this and making sure the teachers who teach it are given the requisite skill set like they do for every other subject.
So we also spoke a lot about comprehensive sexuality education, sex ed. So how does it help young people, and especially women, right, understand themselves better and view others also in a completely different perspective? How does CSE basically help an individual grow?
Oh my God, CSE is like the ultimate, kind of the ultimate introduction to yourself and to your choices that you have, right? So I think as a woman, it's so important. Like when I go and do workshops, especially not just rural areas, even in Colombo, for instance, people don't know where your ovaries are, where is your uterus, like the most basic anatomy they should know. None of them have looked at their vulva. They don't know what their vulva looks like. the entrance to the vagina. They
Do a
don't know.
mirror thing, or-
I tell them to do it. I said, go home, take a mirror, look down there and see what's there. Because what you see on Google is normally a very Caucasian model, right? And it's very different. Everyone's vulva looks different. So women don't know that basic. They only what they see on Google, what they see in porn, for instance, right? But they have never seen their own vulva. So CSE gives you an understanding of not just the anatomy, but also it touches on things like choices for contraception, choices when you make a good choice for a relationship, for instance. It teaches you about sexually transmitted infections, what to look out for. It teaches you about how to seek help, where to seek help if you have an issue. It teaches you about consent, for instance, which is so important, not just when you're a young person, but for your life throughout, right? So CSE is so very important for everybody, not just women. And also even building empathy for male participants who might not traditionally know what a period is, the female anatomy, what pregnancy is. It's so very important.
Creating that dialogue
Yeah.
between men, young boys, and all. It's very important. Hans, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I mean, not really, except that some boys, I mean, girls get upset. They say, sir, my boyfriend thinks that I can hold my period in and jump into the pool. You know what I mean? So no understanding even what the period is.
Yeah.
And that's quite common.
And it's also common to not bring in males to hear about it. It's only it's a female problem, so only the girls should be here. The boys don't have to learn about periods.
I mean, one of the anecdotes I share regularly is this teacher at a boys' school, health and physical education teacher. So we do workshops, try and giving them a skill set. I said, describe the periods or menstruation cycle, because the conversation, how they talk about it, what they say about it, it just helps me position and then do
gauge
the
what-
training,
yeah.
gauge where we are.
Yeah.
And she comes and she draws the internal with the fallopian
Anatomy,
tubes
yeah.
and anatomy and the egg sacs and everything. And then she goes in Sinhalese. When the egg leaves the egg sac, there is a wound, and the blood from this wound flows along the fallopian tube through the uterus and out the vagina. And I thought, she must be joking, right? And I smiled. And then you had the teachers also all looking sort of quizzically, what's going on here? And I said, madam, can you repeat that? And then she repeated that. ඩිම්බකෝෂයෙන් ඩිම්බය පිටත් වෙද්දී තුවාලයක් ඇති වෙනවා. ඒ තුවාලයෙන් ලේ ගලාගෙන ඇවිල්ලා ගර්භාෂය තුලින් ගිහිල්ලා යෝනි මාර්ගයෙන් පිටත් වෙනවා. So then it transpired, we got someone else to come and do it, and then I sat with her, and it transpires that this is now what she has been told when she was a child.
Oh.
Right? Now she has been teaching health and physical education for 13 years in this school. Right? Now, she has not ventured to look at that lesson for herself or for her students. And I'm not even blaming her. She's NIE trained. Why aren't you training her to implement that lesson? What's going on? What is the shortcut that happens
Yeah.
that this health and physical education teacher who claims to be trained by the NIE cannot do that simple task and is now reliant on a story that she has been told as a child in terms of what is happening to her body.
And now for 13 years, she has passed this on to 13 batches of
Not
students.
perhaps not passed on anything because she would have ignored the lesson.
True.
Right? So because if she read the lesson, she would have had an epiphany.
True.
Right.
So to anyone who feels misunderstood, ashamed, and they feel like they cannot really talk about this with anyone, I want you to give them a small message through this podcast. What do you have to say to someone who can resonate with feeling shame surrounding conversations being brought up like this?
You are not alone. This is something that everybody has felt. I feel especially in this country where we see sex and we see pleasure as such a taboo subject. But there is hope, I would say, maybe a little bit of hope coming through, where there are strategies in place trying to get implemented to make sex a conversation that is happening, that's open. So I would say you're not alone, but there is also help available if you have problems. You just have to, it's a bit difficult to find out the pathway to get help, but there is help available. And hopefully that will come out more into the public as well with these strategies being put in place.
Yeah, I would concur again. We are there,
Yeah, of course.
and there are organizations like us out there.
name a few just for
Yes.
Family Planning Association.
Yeah,
They're
and
pretty good.
even the Grassrooted Trust.
The
they've got
Grassrooted Trust.
Bakamono.
Yeah.
And the ARA Initiative, we have a website as well. We have, so all of us have social media platforms. FPA, the Family Planning Association in Sri Lanka as well, has a very active social media platform with blogs and everything where you can find information. They also have hotlines
Yeah.
where you can reach out if you have questions.
Yeah.
And they have clinics which are non-judgmental and serve, no matter, regardless of your age or gender, you can come and get service.
So like you said, bakamono.lk is there in Tamil, it's there in Sinhalese, so it's not just information in English. And there are organizations like that out there. There are queer organizations too. If you Google, you will see a list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Hans? Anything else that we missed out on?
No, I wouldn't say, unless you have something that we'd like to
I mean,
cover
I
specifically.
feel like we covered a lot, but
Yeah, I
there's
think
something that's beyond my scope also and understanding I'd like you to bring it up.
I feel like just the keynotes, that the key points are just that comprehensive sexual education is so essential for anybody, everybody. And we need to capacitate teachers to teach it. Because especially if it's going to be set in guidelines where it comes into school curriculum, it has to be taught, not skipped over. And there has to be some kind of regulation in place to make sure that happens.
I mean, any kind of standard monitoring and evaluation process that you have for any other implementation of a curriculum should be also put in place here. And we need parents on board.
Yes.
We need parents to be part of the teaching community here. And so any model that arises from this necessarily has to make parents a part of it, because every school we go to, before we go and have a chat with the parents and we say, we are coming to teach this to your kids, we are coming to talk to your kids about this. And I have done these schools now, from international schools right down to small schools in places like Mukulanyaya. Parents are happy for us to do that if they understand what we're going to say and how we're going to say it. So this is a wonderful opportunity for government in this time of perceived change to actually move the ball forward in this area and make sure that we are not talking about this in 30 years again. Still here, right?
Exactly.
Scratching our heads, wondering what we can do when these answers have been around for a while now.
And acting surprised when we have all these other issues that come up, like the increased incidence of HIV, for instance, unintended teenage pregnancies.
And child sexual abuse. All non-controversial issues. So instead of crying about it in Parliament, hopefully legislators will get down to doing something about it. Yeah.
So through that much needed conversation today, we have challenged the silence and stigma surrounding topics like pleasure, consent, as well as choice. And this was definitely a much needed discourse. Many of us need to hear this more. Many of us need to understand this more. So I'm very, very grateful to you, Hans Billimoria, Director of the Grassroots Trust, as well as Dr. Rashmi Balasuriya from the ARA Initiative. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insights, experience, and everything else that we needed to hear.
Thank you.
And to you, if there's anyone out there who can relate, anyone else who learned something that you did not know all this time, stay tuned with us. We have more episodes coming up. Share this with your loved ones, anyone you know who can resonate with these topics. And for yourself as well, you can join us next time as well. We will be having several more podcast episodes covering topics that we need to understand in order to build a better, loving, and more accepting society. So until then, keep in mind, no guilt, just good choices.